We left off last video getting the navigational foundation built for our app. As you can see here, we have the favorites tab and the search tab. What we're going to start the process of now is actually building this search screen that you see currently on the screen. But if you look on the screen, like we have that green button at the bottom, and then if I pull up the user info screen, you see we reuse those buttons. So what we're going to do in this video is start creating some reusable components. We're going to create a button that we're going to reuse, and then we're also going to create a custom text field that has that text field all formatted, even though currently in the app, that is the only place that text field is used. So I like to do that, even if it's only used in one place. I still like to make it an object. And the reason being is it yanks that stylization code out of the view controller. And two, just what I found in my career, it's good to make things reusable because you never know when you're going to need to use that. Maybe the product people come in and they want a new screen and it has a bunch of text fields and you already got that taken care of. So those are the reasons I like to do that. And throughout the app, we're going to be creating a bunch of custom components like this. And this is kind of just the first taste of it. So let's get to it. Let's build the button first. So again, do Command N to pull up a new file. We're going to do a Cocoa Touch class. Next. Make sure it's a UI button. Remember, you might have to change it from UI view controller or another one. And I'm going to name this GF button. And I'm going to talk about this prefix real quick and why I like to do this. This is actually a very common practice. Some people like it, some people are against it. But the reason being is it identifies it as something we have created. And GF stands for GitHub followers, by the way. That's the name of the app. But for example, Aluna, the company I work for, we do everything AL. Sometimes in my tutorials, I do SA button, like Sean Allen button. And Facebook, you'll see FB this. So the idea is to let it know that you built that here internally. So you know that, hey, GF button, that's an internal button. We built that. Because sometimes when you bring in, frameworks or third-party libraries, they have their own components. So hopefully they name it something that is easily identifiable. Unfortunately, as much as I love Lottie, they named like their animation view that does the animations just animation view, right? You can see how that could potentially collide with maybe an animation view that, you wrote internally if you're not, tagging it with your little code like GF. So again, that's just a common practice. I like it. It's easily identifiable. Some people may not. We're going to be naming all our custom stuff GF fill in the blank. So that's why we do that. So hit next and we should have our, save it, create it, I'm sorry. And we have our blank GF button. As always, we get rid of the comments and we start from scratch here. So let's scroll up a little bit. No, we can't. So the first thing you need here is your init methods. So if you start typing init, you're going to get some autocomplete. And here's the default initializer with the frame, because you're initializing a button like, with the frame, like how big it is. Anytime you're overriding, so because this is a subclass of UIButton, right? We're creating our own subclass of UIButton called GF button. We have to override the initializer if we're going to do custom stuff in it, which we are. If we weren't doing any custom configuration, we wouldn't have to override the init because there's nothing going on here. So how you make sure you always call the default one is by calling the super. So super.init. Super basically means, and then we want to initialize it with the frame that we pass in. Super basically means we're calling the superclass or the parent. So by what happens in this function is we're calling the normal init method that is on UIButton. Like we're making sure all that happens first. So everything Apple built into the default UIButton, we're calling that. And then we're doing our custom code in here, right? So it's kind of like whenever you subclass an object, you're kind of building on top of the existing object. So example, we're building our GF button on top of UIButton. Another way to flip that is that like GF button is like a child class of the parent class UIButton. We're going to come back and fill in that custom code in a second, but as you see, Xcode is yelling at us. Required initializer, init coder must be provided by a subclass of UIButton. Basically what this means, and you can hit the fix to have it fill in for you. Basically what this means is we have two initializer methods, and this one gets called, the coder one, when you initialize this GF button via storyboard. Now, of course, we're not, using storyboards, so that's why we just put fatal error, this could not be implemented because we're not using any storyboards. However, when you're subclassing things from UIKit like UIButton, UILabel, you have to handle the storyboard case. Again, we're not going to write any code in there, but Xcode will yell at you if you don't have the initializer. But the key takeaway is this is what handles initialization via storyboard. Now we're going to start implementing our custom code here that I put up there, and we're going to do this in a private func called configure. And I do just the generic configure because this is going to be private. By private, it means it can only be called in this class. So basically, like I can't, if I initialize a button outside in a view controller or something like that, I can't call like my gfbutton.configure. Like I can't call that because that's what this private does, because I don't want people calling this configure method outside the initialization of this button. So that's what we're going to do here. And we're going to do, this is we're going to set up the look of the button. So layer.corner radius equals 10. And then we're going to configure our title label now, because we want all of our title labels to be like the same font and the same color. Because if you look at the design, like the background of the button can change, but the title is always white. So title label.text color equals .white. So there's that. Now let's set the font. Title label font equals UI font. And here's where we're going to get into some dynamic type stuff. And we're not going to do a whole dedicated video on dynamic type, but we're going to kind of weave it in as we implement it. So if you do UI font.preferred, can't type, .preferred font for text style, that's what we want here. So let's go to some documentation real quick. The human interface guidelines. This is the typography section. This will tell you all about some typography, but here's the key piece of information right here. Choosing fonts to enhance your app. Use built-in text styles whenever possible. The built-in text style lets you express content in ways that are visually distinct while retaining optimal legibility. These styles include headline, body, callout, several sizes of title. Anyway, but basically this is how you get dynamic type. And what is dynamic type? Pull up the phone here. You see in the settings, if you go to like display and brightness, scroll to the bottom, you'll see this text size. And you can see you can make your text size smaller or larger. And if your app is not adapting to dynamic type, then your app won't respond. Your fonts will always be the same size, which the user has, clearly stated like, hey, I want my font to be bigger. I want my font to be smaller. Now, sometimes you'll see in this project, we don't use dynamic type for everywhere we have words, because sometimes it doesn't make sense, but sometimes it does. And we'll talk about the nuance of that decision. Here in our button titles, we do want that to conform to dynamic type. And in order to do that, you do preferred font size for text style. And these are all the text styles here. If you type the dot, you can see body, callout, caption, footnote. These are all the different styles. Now you may be wondering like, well, we're going to use headline real quick. I just don't want Xcode to yell at me. So if you're wondering how do I know what all these look like? There's an amazing repo, and I use this for the colors we're going to talk about. So I'd recommend downloading this and putting this on your phone. It's called Semantic UI. And if you look here, basically all these semantic colors, right? We talked about the system pink, system blue. It'll just list all the colors in a table view, and you can switch your phone back and forth from dark mode to light mode. Pro tip, you can add that into Control Center. So you can just swipe down from the upper right, or however you get to Control Center, flip to dark mode like super fast. So in this app, you can switch back and forth between light mode and dark mode, see how all these colors change. And there's a ton of colors. I'm probably scrolling through here on an app, but this also has fonts. If you look here, you can see large title, headline. You can see what the fonts are. You can even see what the SF symbols look like. So I highly, highly recommend going to this repo. Link will be in the course information, and downloading this app and putting it on your phone. While I was building this project, I was constantly opening this up, flipping back and forth between light and dark mode, because you'll see there's like all different shades of gray. There's like primary gray, secondary gray, tertiary gray, and seeing what those look like on light and dark mode super fast. This is an insanely valuable app. Go download this right now. I promise you, you will use it a ton. So back to our button, we have our text style, which is headline. Essentially, headline is like bold, and we want our button titles to be bold. And for auto layout purposes, we want to translate our auto resizing mask into constraints equals false. Basically what this says is to use auto layout. And when you're doing your UI programmatically, which we haven't got into yet, we will get into that in the next video where we start building that screen. One of the things you need to do is always set those into false so you actually use auto layout. It's actually kind of annoying. Like every time you create, like if you were to create a UI button or a GF button in your view controller, you would have to make sure you had this line of code. So by putting it here in the actual GF button class, anytime we initialize a GF button, because we know we're going to use auto layout and do our constraints programmatically, so I don't have to type this out every single time. Every GF button that I make is going to have their auto resizing mask into constraints is going to be false. So that's why I do that. And by the way, you don't have to do this. I'm going to start doing this, is lining up my equal signs. I like the way it looks. I think it looks nice and clean. Some people disagree with it. You don't have to do it. I'm going to do it. So now that we have our basic configuration, again, what we're doing is we're setting our corner radius to 10, as you see in the button here. Our title label is going to be white, and our preferred font size is going to be headline, and we translate our auto resizing mask into false. So let's make sure we call configure up in the initial initializer. So the basics of this is done. However, as you saw in the design, we have different colors. I don't want to have to like do gfbutton.background color equals this every single time. So we're going to create a custom initializer. So in our view controllers, when I initialize a GF button, I can pass in a color and a title, right? Because the background color and what the button says is going to be different every time. So by creating that custom initializer, I can just do that all in one line. And again, you'll see how this comes into play when we build the search screen in the next video. So to do that, let's go ahead and type out, we're typing out another init method. So init, and then we're just creating our own one. So we're going to do background color. So we want to pass in, that's going to be a UI color. And we're also going to pass in a title, which is a string. So, and just like we did up here, where we had to call the super init, super.init. And this time we don't have a frame to pass through. Like up here on line 13, like we got a frame, so we just kind of pass through that same frame down to here. But this time we're just going to do .0. So cgrec.0, normally when you initialize the button, you have to give it like a height, width, X and Y coordinates. Well, we know we're going to do all that with auto layout constraints, so we can initialize this with a frame of 0. So now we need to set our background color and title. So we do self.background color equals background color. And what's going on here is we're setting the background color of the button equal to whatever we passed in right here, this background color. I know they're the same name, but that's why. This one being in blue and having the self before it. So self means this button, this GF button. So this GF button's background color, and that's blue. Blue lets you know it's like a default thing, is going to be equal to the background color that we pass in. So that's how that goes down. So same thing with title. Self.set title. And then we need to pass in a string. We're going to pass in the title that we pass in here. And then for control state is normal. So there's different states of buttons like press and all that stuff. Normal is what you have to use most of the time. So yeah, we're setting our title to whatever we pass in and background color. So what this is going to allow us to do, and again, you'll see this in the next video, is when we initialize the GF button, we can use this initializer and right away just pass in whatever background color we want and then whatever title we want it to be. And our GF button is set all in one line. We don't have to do all this configuration in the view controllers. Again, you're going to see this come into play in the next video. So the last thing we need to do to make this complete is call configure that we wrote down here. So what happens here is, again, we pass in the background color and the title. It sets that right here. And then it also calls configure as well. So it sets up all the corner radius, the font color, and the constraint stuff. So this is the GF button. And again, we're going to use this a lot. So you're going to see how much time this saves when we just initialize that real quick. And then one quick note I forgot to mention about the dynamic type is this is for like the default SF font, the system font in Apple. That's the font we're using. Because what we're actually going for this to feel like an Apple app. That's why we're using a lot of the default stuff. However, I know you out there, may be dealing with a lot of custom stuff, custom fonts, all that stuff. I'm not discouraging custom fonts. That's perfectly fine. Just know that there's extra work that you have to do. And there is a way to have your custom font conform or make it available for dynamic type. But again, there's extra steps there. I'm not going to get into that. I just wanted to let you know it is possible. So now we're going to do something very similar for that custom text field that you see on screen. You see it's got some rounded corners. We have some font sizing. We have the placeholder value. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So back to our GitHub followers folder here on the left. Again, Command N for a new file. Cocoa Touch class, hit next, make it a subclass of a UITextField. And we're going to call this again, GFTextField. Now, because we don't have a lot of text fields in this app, we're just going to call it the generic one. In projects, I've done something like AL authentication text field, AL onboarding text field. Like you might want to get more specific because a lot of apps have more text fields. But for us, we're just going to name it that. And then same thing, we're going to have the required init. A lot of this will be very similar, but that's fine. It's good. Repetition is the key to learning. So super.init, and then again, pass in the frame. We're not going to have a custom initializer on this one, so this will be a little simpler. And again, we're going to get the required initializer. Remember, this is kind of like to really put it simply, this is the storyboard initializer. And now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call create our configure function. And it'll be private because I don't want people to configure this or call configure outside of this file. So private configure. And now we're going to start, let's make sure we call it. I always kind of forget to do that. Now we're going to start writing all the stylization code. And especially with text labels, because you got like keyboard stuff, return types, all that, there's a lot of stylization code. So this is why these are great to just make a custom text field and yank all that out of your view controller. Well, I forgot to put func. Might need that. All right, so let's start writing this custom code. So the first thing I want to write so I don't forget is the auto resizing constraints equals false. Then we're going to do, so I like to space out my code. You'll see how this works. I'll come back and explain this, but we're going to do layer.corner radius, same thing, equals 10. Let's be consistent. And I like to logically group these. So corner radius is around the edge of the text field. So now I'm also going to talk about the border. As you can see here in the design, it does have a little border, a color to it as well. So layer.border width equals 2. Layer.border color equals .system. Actually, I forgot. When dealing with layer.border color, you have to use .cg colors. So in order to do that, you have to do the full UI color .system. We're going to do system gray 4. And again, how I came up with this shade was using that semantic colors app. Scrolling through there, looking for the kind of gray I wanted, and then use that. Because this gray in light mode is different than it'll be in dark mode. So, and again, you can flip back and forth between dark mode and light mode on that app to see the difference. And then, like I said, when dealing with the layers, you have to do .cg color for core graphics. And then continuing with the logical groupings, now we're starting to deal with like the text. So we're going to do text color of this label equal, and then back to the colors things. There's a color called .label. I know that doesn't sound like a color, but it is. So what .label is, this will be basically black on light mode and white on dark mode. It's kind of like the standard UI label color. So that's what we're going to use for, the color of the text in there. And then now we're going to use tint color. So what tint color does is tint color is the blinking cursor. So we want that to be the same color as that. Again, black in light mode, white in dark mode. Text alignment. We're going to make this center where they enter the username. I don't want it like a line left. It looks weird. So just .center for the text alignment. And again, we're going to use dynamic type for this. So the font is going to equal UI font.preferred font for text style. And we're going to use title 2, again, because I want this to be larger and bigger. And then now we do want to adjust the font size to fit width. And that's going to be to true. So basically what this means, if somebody has a really long username, the font will kind of shrink to make sure it fits in the text field. And we do want to have the minimum font size equal to 12. So I want it to shrink, but I don't want it to go down to like 4-point font. Like the minimum is 12. So just to keep it looking good. Next, we want to set the background color to tertiary. Tertiary system background. Again, you can look at the semantic color app to see how I got that. I wanted it to be like a very lighter color. I didn't want it to blend in with the background, but not super bold. So that's how I came up with this. Now we want to set up the auto correction type, right? Because we don't want equals dot. You can see the different types you can do. Default, no, yes. I don't want auto correcting, right? Because usernames, all kinds of weird stuff. I don't want the annoying auto correct. So we're going to turn auto correct off for this text field. So you can see all the difference that we haven't even gotten into keyboard type stuff yet. We're going to do that in a later video. But you can see how like a label, there's a lot to customize. So that's why, like I mentioned before, and I just want to reiterate, even though I'm not reusing this label, I still like putting all this code into a custom, GF text field label. Because if I didn't, I would have to have all this styling code in my view controller, and that's just clutter that's unnecessary. So the last thing we want to do is the placeholder text. So again, type placeholder equals, and then give it a string, say enter a user name for our placeholder text. And I know I kind of rattled through that pretty quickly. You may be wondering like, oh, how I kind of came up with this. You got to remember, I've already coded this project before, so I know like what is going to be there. How I figured it out, because I want to talk through my thought process, is again, I designed it. And then, as I'm building it, I'm like testing things, right? Like I didn't know exactly I wanted system gray. I tested a couple colors. Okay, cool. System gray is the one I wanted. Tested different border widths. Yeah, okay, two feels the best. Same thing with quarter radius. Same thing with all this stuff, right? There was testing and tweaking that went into this. I guess I don't want to portray that you have to have all this figured out before you start typing. There's a lot of trial and error that goes into building and tweaking this. That's typically how it goes. Again, of course, when I'm teaching the video, I don't want to go through all that trial and error on the video, right? I have all my values. And you're going to see that a lot, especially when it comes to laying out the UI with all the custom constraints and stuff. Like we're going to be doing a lot of like padding and all that stuff, and I'm going to have the numbers dialed in right away. That's because I went through a lot of trial and error tweaking. So that is normal. So the last little bit of cleanup I like to do here is line up my equal signs. Again, you don't have to do this. So this is going to be the longest one, so I always kind of try to line it up with that one. It's just the easiest way. Yes, this is tedious. This is why people don't like it. It's tedious. I get it. I am not going to act like it's not tedious. But I just really think it makes the code look a lot cleaner, a lot easier to read. And again, some people think it's harder to read because their eyes have to go back and forth to like make sure which lines up. But that's why I do like the logical spacing. Again, this is just my preference. You can choose how to do it how you like. But this is our GF text field. We can't really run it because we haven't built one yet. But in the next video, we're going to utilize the GF button and the GF text field to quickly build our search screen. Because we've done a lot of the styling right here because it's basically just a text field and a button. So it's going to go real quick in the next video because we've done this work up front. So let's get to it.